Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities Podcast. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199, a marketing and comms agency working in sustainable commodities, and with me
It's Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates, working in forest risk commodities.
Today, we welcome Ben Thornton Jones. He's Director of Sustainable Supply at Haleon, the world-leading consumer health company behind brands like Aquafresh, Sensodyne, Panadol, Centrum, Savirax, and so many more, hundreds more, I guess, or dozens more. We're going to be talking a lot about some of the specific challenges related to the sustainable sourcing of ingredients for consumer health, touching on oleochemicals, EUDR, legislation, mint. Thankfully, there's no better person to ask Ben the important questions here than Judith.
Thank you. Thank you for that lead. I feel like a drum roll is necessary. And yeah, so Ben, obviously we know each other quite well, but it would just be great for you to explain what part of the industry you work in. What is your job function within Haleon, and a little bit more about Haleon.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast today. I've been an avid listener, so I really love talking about these topics that you go through and the guests that you've got. From my side, yes. So as you introduced me, Director of Sustainable Supply at Haleon, and yeah, my background is before I got into the sustainable side of things, I've done pretty much every role in my career in supply chain and then procurement. And I think if you work right the way through, as I have over 20 years in supply chain and procurement, you realize that the magic, so to speak, on sustainability is it all happens in the supply chain. Most of the companies that I worked for, the upstream part of the supply chain is by far the largest part of the carbon footprint for any company. It's by far the riskiest area, let's say, for human rights challenges. And of course, it's where you are working deeper into supply chains to source some of the key commodities that have its own challenges, whether it's topics like deforestation that I know that you guys have gone through as well. So I think it was the natural movement to go into for me as a role. And that's exactly what I do as Director of Sustainable Supply. I work very closely with our global procurement team, also directly with suppliers, but my entire life is facing upstream in our supply chain. And it's digging into, yes, we have to prioritize the biggest materials, commodities, because we buy thousands and thousands of different things, not to mention the services for also us to run as a business. But we do heavily prioritize, like other companies do, on the materials and supply chains that really matter to us. And we go in there and we tackle things like the climate and carbon footprint of those, because we've made a science-based commitment. Our near term to 2030 is a minus 42% reduction in our GHG footprint by 2030. That's going to take a lot of work and a lot of focus. We want to respect human rights, and we have a program around sustainable sourcing, which in a nice way I help to form, and it builds all of these things together, where we focus on key commodities and material supply chains that we want to quote unquote be sustainably sourced by 2030. And one of those is palm oil, as well as other things.
So yeah, I was just going to ask, so what are the big ones? You've got palm oil.
Yeah, palm oil, our paper packaging supply chain, so effectively linked to timber. We buy products that, again, I think we'll get onto the derivatives topic, but we have derivatives of the corn and wheat supply chains. Then we have mint. We make a lot of toothpaste, so we buy a lot of mint, which we might touch on later on as well. And then some more smaller ones that we would go into, carrageenan, a material that goes into our particular Aquafresh formulation, which derives from seaweed, a little bit of fish oils for some of our products, and a tiny bit of soy, again, derivatized as well. So those have been the key focuses since we launched as a business back in 2021, and we're making great progress on all of those.
So when we look at palm oil to start off with, because I'm fascinated when you look at a box of toothpaste, you never have a clue what's in it. You know, a consumer wouldn't have a clue. So how did you start off identifying palm oil was a risk to you as a business?
Well, a lot of people internally in Haleon, of course, know that we're linked to palm oil, but we don't buy any palm oil in its kind of raw form. It's always a derivative of whether it's glycerin or SLS and things like this. And funny story, I disappointed someone at a party years ago who sort of said, "Oh, we're completely palm oil free household. We've completely eradicated it because it's so bad." And of course, it has its challenges. And I said, "Oh, what are you brushing your teeth with?" And they said, "Oh, well, normal toothpaste." And I said, "Oh, well, it might not say on the back that it's palm oil, but a lot of the stuff that goes into that is derivative of palm oil." So yeah, I don't think I made a friend at that party when I revealed that. But this is the realization that palm oil is a sort of wonder crop, as we'll talk about, and hence why it's expanded over the last 20, 30 years in certain countries and caused the challenges that it has. But yes, it's one of the key ingredients that goes into our toothpaste as well as other things. And so it's a big focus for us as a key material that we want to make sure is sustainably sourced. But being a derivative of palm oil, so it's not the actual palm oil, I guess you're adding one step in the supply chain that makes it that bit more challenging from a traceability perspective and what you can do with it. And it's also glycerin, which is the main material that we're linked to and we buy, is, it's a byproduct of the biodiesel industry. So again, we're kind of, I guess we're a smaller player in that area, and there's many companies like us that buy these materials, but it's slightly different to the palm oil that maybe a large food company would talk about and the work that they have to do on it. So it makes it quite challenging, but absolutely the size and the importance of that material is key for us, and so has been a focus for us for many, many years, and why we've started to make really great progress on that. Understand the supply chain behind it, source it more sustainably under certain standards, and do all we can to fulfill that commitment to 2030 to have it sustainably sourced and deforestation free.
And
So how?
sorry,
Yeah.
carry on, Judith. I was just going to say, how is the challenge traceability? How do you trace that?
with severe difficulty. So it would be fair to say that it's very, very challenging. Well, let's take a step back. I believe, and we work on other commodities, traceability is just challenging full stop on any material, because we are at the very end, manufacturing side of the supply chain, depending on the material that it can be, and they will vary. You could have 3 tiers until you get to the source, whether a farm or a plantation. You could have 6 tiers, you could have 8 tiers. It makes it quite challenging. So just for us to do traceability is quite challenging, but of course we work very closely with our tier 1 closest suppliers to understand that. But again, coming back to the materials that we buy that derive from palm oil, and they go through this extra processing of being under the bracket of an oleochemical. Judith, I hope I'll do this justice, but I guess that means a chemical that is produced from a vegetable oil or a natural starting point. Yeah, means that you've got more tiers to go through. And also, we buy our glycerin and other materials through a certification, RSPO, which I'm sure you talked about, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. But we buy mass balance. So this is, yes, we buy the material, but it's invariably a sustainable material is, of course, mixed in the same pot, if you like, with not necessarily unsustainable, but unknown origins of materials. Therefore, we're doing our bit, but at the same time, we can't fully trace our materials all the way back to a single plantation, and one that is being managed under sustainable standards. That's something that we do want to change, but again, I think it's challenging to access oleochemicals above this mass balance standard. We'd love to get to segregated, identity preserved, which is the step ups in RSPO, but that's been a challenge for that even to be possible. I think things are starting to change, and of course you've talked in length about the EUDR, and so some legislations and things like that I think are really forcing the issue, which of course we're taking advantage of, because the EU is a big market for us to bring materials into, and therefore once that comes into effect through the good work that our suppliers are doing, it will be brought in with that adherence to EUDR and effectively deforestation free. But we have the rest of the world to work on, so I think it's going to take longer possibly than the larger food companies and buying the raw palm oil, but we're determined to get there, and we're working very hard, even with our peers and other people in the oleochemicals industry, to try and push the envelope on that one.
Yeah, so just really focused on traceability then. I mean, obviously incredibly complex. I mean, how have you even made a start on understanding traceability?
Well, what we've done is we found some friends, and those friends are all part of a group called ASD, so Action for Sustainable Derivatives. This is a group that I'm having to think now. I think we joined back in 2019, first time as a member, and it's run by the team at BSR and also Transitions. And yeah, they came to us and said, are you finding it challenging with oleochemicals to, commit to traceability and sustainable palm oil derivatives? Absolutely, yes. And I think they were having these same conversations with lots and lots of other companies. So it's grown over time, even since we've become members. But this is a collaborative group of people linked to the oleochemical industry that have the same commitments to want to make it sustainable and source their materials sustainably. So you have other groups on there, such as L'Oreal, Beiersdorf, other big groups and big brand owners. And by being part of that group, of course, being part of any industry group, you get that great collaboration. You're able to, you know, talk to each other about the challenges that you've all got, and you'll quickly realize everyone's got the same challenges. But the key thing is that as a membership group, what's been really powerful is, particularly on Judith, your question around traceability, ASD has been able to pool our volumes together as a group. We are a tiny, tiny buyer of palm oil and, linked to palm oil derivatives. But if you pooled all ASD members together, it becomes quite a powerful volume that you can go to suppliers, and that's exactly what ASD do on our behalf, to do this traceability work. So to ask them on behalf of members to provide information behind the palm oil mills, crushers, plantations that we are linked to. And that's enabled us to, for the first time a few years ago, get some really good traceability to the levels across each of those areas, above 80%. And now we get above 90% in terms of the volume of our materials that we can trace back to a mill or a plantation, which has been super powerful. And then more recently, another thing that we've been able to access, which we wouldn't have done previously, because of it's expensive and it's complicated to do, is ASD gave members this option to, again, pool their resources and funding together to be able to access satellite monitoring, which I'm sure you guys have talked about before. We know the pioneers in palm oil and consumer companies who've accessed this satellite monitoring to see this real-time impact and tracing of deforestation happening. That was very challenging for us as a business to be able to access, but this is something now through the ASD group that they're providing the ability for us to be able to see and gain access to, of course, then if something is seen, be able to work on grievances and obviously interacting with our own suppliers and supply chain to pick up on any adverse events that we've seen to address that. So collaboration is key here. We would never have been able to get to where we are today without being part of this collaborative group. And we will continue to. And that has even expanded, I have to say, into a timber group that's recently launched, and we're a founding member of as well. So yeah, where it's a key commodity for us, but we perhaps don't have the leverage and scale of some other companies. I think pooling together with other companies has been a real unlock for us to be able to go further and go quicker than they would have done before.
Because you must have one eye, obviously always on the future working in sustainability, but one eye in the future in terms of legislation. We've got EUDR as we speak today. We've got EUDR coming in 3 months. And I guess you're partially affected to some degree, although oleochemicals as a group has a slightly different treatment under that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you planning for the future with it? Was that one of the kind of driving forces to get that traceability done now?
Yeah, I mean, it all started, I have to say, from our commitment to 2030 that we set as we spun as a company. So that clearly set out for all of our key materials, of which palm oil derivatives is one, that we wanted to be sustainably sourced and deforestation free by 2030. So we were always on this path. Now, legislation and other things come in and, they, how do we say, they might put some more wind in your sails sometimes.
It's the stick and carrot approach, isn't it?
It is indeed. It is indeed, and it totally has a place. I truly believe that it sets out the goalposts for companies and for markets to to manage their business. So I'm a big supporter of that, and do hope it comes in 3 months' time, because we've been doing a lot of work, as I know other people have. So yes, absolutely, that's been part of the driver towards it. But we always had this commitment previously to be able to do that.
Has that primarily been on the packaging side then? The timber stuff has been a big part. The
Yes,
EUDR for you.
yeah, that's a big part as well. Yeah, we're as I say, from those key materials that we are linked to, palm oil derivatives is on there in terms of the annex list. Paper packaging linked to timber is absolutely on there. Soy as a derivative is not on there, may come on at some point. So these are the sort of quirks. And again, this isn't the EUDR conversation, but you really have to get into the detail of some of these things, and even that can be a bit foggy. But yes, this has been a lot of the work that we've gone into, focusing on those and making sure that our supply chain is actually set up for it. From our point of view, we stand in a position where we're not a trader or operator under the EUDR, but of course what it becomes then is that our suppliers are, and yes, there's a reputational impact there, but probably the bigger thing is, if they're not in place and they're not ready, we don't want any shortages at our own factories to stop the lines running and stop us creating the products that our consumers need. So a lot of good work's gone into there, but from the interactions that we had already, and hey, everyone's had an extra 12 months from since it was supposed to be coming in before. People certainly, I can say, from a palm oil and a timber perspective, seem to be in a good position to be ready to go.
So your business has got a global footprint. Obviously, you've got businesses in Europe. How do you think the EUDR is affecting your business globally? Do you think it's going to make differences in America or places like India? What's your view?
It's a good question. It's hard to judge. I mean, what I've seen in my role over the last 4 years, and this isn't just focused on EUDR, but generally legislations, you do see that the EU is a leader, whether that's particular markets on, the German Supply Chain Act, or even, I mean, Modern Slavery Act in the UK. That seems to create a ripple effect to other markets, other countries, bringing in those similar legislations. So on the positive side, I would see that. I mean, let's face it, the EUDR was brought in, following the COP, where everyone, agreed to do, something on deforestation. This is how the EU have transposed that and rolled it out in the market. So I think we will see that in other places. And of course, from a global company perspective, we would like, as much as possible, global legislation to be standardized, because it's a juggle, working across different markets if standards differ. And the biggest challenge is where, legislations conflict with each other, which, thankfully we don't necessarily see from this case. So yes, I think it should help. And like I say, the EU is a big market for us. So, having adherence to the EUDR means that a huge chunk of our portfolio perhaps will be accelerated to be deforestation free earlier than the rest. And then I do believe that what we will see is other legislation kicking in, and probably looking to the EUDR for those certain standards, which might only accelerate things even further. And of course, because people have been forced to adhere to the EUDR, I think, whereas the conversation previously was, it's very challenging to get these certain oleochemicals into a full traceability or to provide the proof of deforestation free. I think by having to adhere to it, it's proving that it can be done. Therefore, the next question would be, well, why can that approach not then be taken on the rest of our portfolio? So those are the type of questions that we're certainly having, to ensure that we're fully globally in the place that we want to be by 2030 to meet that commitment that we set out.
Right. Now, one of the commodities, kind of moving away from the EUDR side of things, one of the commodities you mentioned earlier was mint. I don't think that's very likely to be ending up under EUDR anytime soon. I think you're probably fairly safe from that, but you're still doing some work on it. What are the big risks in mint, and what are you doing on that front?
Well, like I said at the start, mint is super important to us. Again, coming back to, we have a big oral health, let's call it toothpaste, business to make it easy for people, and it's minty. And guess what? It's got some natural mint in there. It's not just all flavors and chemicals and things like this. Now, most of the world's mint comes from India. Always hard to get an exact figure, but roughly 80% of the world's natural mint comes from India, with the remaining balance mostly coming from North America and a few other places. But yeah, the biggest challenge that we have on mint is climate change. And this is a similar story to whether you're talking about cocoa or coffee or other commodities. With the world warming up, and land grabbing, and all of the other challenges that we have with soil, etc. It's just going to become more difficult, and we're seeing this already, to grow mint, and certainly grow mint in a sustainable fashion. It's a very thirsty plant. So again, that's another challenge that we have as well. And all of these challenges we're seeing in India, which is why, some years ago, we decided to make a big focus, again, coming back to this commitment that we had, mint being one of our key materials under that sustainably sourced by 2030 commitment, which is where we've started to invest in programs hand in hand with our suppliers of mint flavors in India. And these are all things to support the farmers on the ground. Mint is just one of the few crops that they grow in their cycles. They probably wouldn't class themselves as mint farmers. After they are active on mint between January and June, when it's harvested just before the monsoon rains, they'll move on to rice, mustard, and then further on move on to potatoes and other things. So it's just one of the crops within their cycles, but that makes it even more important that they see a sustainable and resilient route for them to essentially make some money out of. Otherwise, what's the point? They could move on to growing something different. So we've been very active on the ground and working with our suppliers to do training for the farmers on good agricultural practices, just make them better farmers, to get more yield from the hard work that they put into it. And then there's even other things that you can do in terms of just different mint varieties, larger leaves holding more oil within them. That has all been, really beneficial. And then starting to work on other practices to reduce the amount of water used, and also bring in more modern and sustainable energies, so solar panels on farms that help with the energy needed to pump the water out of the ground instead of a diesel pump to do that. So we're making great progress. We've already seen some results back to show that yields have increased, but input costs have gone down. And now we're starting to do pilots in terms of regenerative agriculture, looking at natural pest control measures. So it's the broad remit of everything.
These are practical things that you're implementing in these projects. It's not, you're not just saying this is what you need to do. You're implementing some things that are delivering results for them as well, I guess.
Absolutely. This is field officers. This is people on the ground walking up to farmers, saying, this is who I am and this is how I'm going to be able to help you. And when you do anything with farmers that have been farming in a way for a long time, it takes some convincing. I think a lot of the benefits have come from the real pioneer farmers that we've had that have said, okay, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to give it a go. And then I think for all farms, but particularly in India, I think if your neighbour's doing something very positive and you see the results, then they look over there theoretical fence and say, oh, why are your plants looking so healthy? Why are the leaves looking so big? So that's definitely been a benefit. So the start was a challenge, and you have to have these pioneers that we found. But rapidly we've increased the number of farmers that we've got under programs. Now we're well over 7,000 farmers under the programs that we're working with, who are being supported and seeing these benefits coming from the interventions that they're putting in place and being supported by.
So what's that in terms of the kind of how mature is that process as part of your supply chain? You say you've got 7,000 farmers done. Is that, are we 10% there? Are we 50% there? Are we 100% there? What's the progress?
We're pretty much 100% there. Because
Wow.
again, 7,000 farmers in the context of the region of India that's growing mint is, again, another tiny proportion. But again, we are only a tiny proportion in terms of the volumes of mint that we're linked to. But at the same time, I guess what we're looking at next is we're not stopping at 7,000 farmers. We're definitely increasing, but we're never going to get to 1 million farmers. That's huge under our own under our own work. But at the same time, we are working with our suppliers who have other customers. We're also in conversations with other brands and companies there on the ground, and not even on mint. Going back to what I said about the farmers moving on to rice and potatoes, it's opened up conversations on a more landscape approach, where we know that other companies, yes, they might not be linked to the mint, but potentially they're linked to the potatoes that are coming from the same region, and in some cases the same farmers. So I think it creates that lighthouse project in a little way, but at the same time, now that we've got that and shown that it's working, it's allowing us to have those more collaborative conversations with others in the industry as well, which of course will take time, but I think that's where you really create the impact, and you create the impact at scale.
That's really interesting to me, the collaboration of it, because it'd be hard for you to collaborate with whoever makes Colgate on mint, because you're competing for that same commodity. But if you're collaborating again with someone who's completely not competitive, I assume you don't use a lot of rice in your products. It's win-win, isn't it? And is it finding those partners is part of the solving the scaling challenge?
It is, but at the same time, it is Colgate that make Colgate. So, very happy to have those conversations, because, I think the other nice thing I've found about working in sustainability is, of course, you've got to be careful on some of the conversations that you have. And of course we are, but at the same time, a lot of the conversations that you can have can be competitive. You can have those conversations because, look, anyone buying mint is going to have the same challenges as we've got. They're not doing it any more interesting way or sourcing in any other way, and they're going to need to continue to get it. So I think let's compete on how good, I don't know, the toothpaste is and the branding, and leave it to those guys. But at the same time, if we don't do this work, it's in our incentive to work together to make sure at least the mint gets in there, and
I hope your procurement teams agree
on the shelf.
So
No, I think we are quite collaborative, by nature as a company, and I think I see that a lot in sustainability, which is really positive.
Yeah. So what are the other big projects that you're working on? I mean, things like human rights or greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, so GHG emissions is a big one. It's an area that has been a real learning curve, I think, for everyone. You generally do a full, GHG footprint assessment yourself. It quite quickly, if you're a company that makes stuff, the results come out and say, oh, what a surprise. Most of your carbon emissions are tied up in the category 1, as we would say, in scope 3, which is the purchase goods and services that you have. A lot can fall into transport and other things, but the reality is a lot of work with procurement, and the first step that we've had to take is to move from secondary data. You can look up, there's emissions factors for every single material, but the reality is, when you have a material supplied by 3 different suppliers, when you actually then go and speak to them by getting that primary data, one could be a factor of 10, one could be a factor of 1, then it really starts to vary. But only by getting that real detail do you start to truly understand where you need to lean in and where people need support. And the range of maturity in suppliers that we have, some are very, very advanced, way more than Haleon on tackling their GHG emissions. Others, you have a call with them and they say, what does GHG stand for? And I'm not belittling that. It's a learning curve for everyone, but the maturity of different suppliers has been something certainly to work on.
But from a priority perspective, obviously you've set your target was it minus 42% by 2030?
Yes.
Was that right?
That's right.
Then you're looking at that, aren't you? You're building that into your procurement process now.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are. And, we've been one of the first companies, and kudos to our procurement team that have really led on this initiative to actually build carbon pricing into our tendering process, which has been really, really interesting because, we're starting to put effectively a price on carbon when we're going into those commercial negotiations. So it's pushing suppliers to give a carbon footprint for what they're supplying or proposing to supply to us. And I think it's incentivizing the suppliers that have already moved on this, whether they've implemented renewable energies or have started to remove waste from their processes and reduce their energy. So yes, that's been a big push that we've been doing our side, but it takes time. And certainly when getting back to palm oil and our other agricultural materials, there's a lot that we can do with the suppliers themselves, but you hit the point where a lot of this carbon is embedded into further points in the supply chain, whether it's the fertilizers, it's the, disruption of soil releasing carbon. These are the things that, these larger topics around regenerative agricultural practices come in. And yes, I see that, we're starting to talk about that and talking to our suppliers about that, but I definitely see these as still at its infancy. This is not the normal way of farming and producing goods across the world, but it needs to be to start to really tackle these challenging emissions embedded into the materials we buy every day.
Well, they're the only people who can credibly, without offsets, go carbon neutral. The farmers, or carbon negative. That's their value.
Yeah.
In terms of solving your problems.
Absolutely.
And meeting your commitments. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's face it, farmers across the world, no matter what market, have for a long time are facing a tough time. I think a lot is being asked of them by the world to produce more food for us because of the growing population.
Cheaper and more sustainably.
Oh, and
all year round.
Yeah, all year round, and maybe think about making a bit of profit so you've got a nice life for yourself after it. These are challenging things, and we've got to work all the way through the supply chain. And I think that's why, coming back to our mint work, we just wanted to step in, have someone walk up to a farmer and to say, here's some things that I can help you with for no investment apart from your time, and maybe having an open mind to do something different that can bring you some benefit. And I think that's opened the door for other things to happen. So I think that is a ethos that needs to be taken to lots of areas, but it's going to take some work for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, the farmers are smallholders. How do you think you can help in the palm oil world, smallholders? Smallholders are a really big subject at the minute because they've been excluded from the EUDR. We can quite clearly see it as, suppliers are definitely taking them out because they can't get the geolocations. Do you work specifically with any palm oil smallholders?
I wouldn't say one-to-one that we have those direct connections to smallholders because, we're many, many tiers away from the supply chain. And again, coming back to traceability, do we even know specifically who our specific smallholders that we're linked to are? No. But at the same time, again, coming back to our work with ASD, we have also been able to be part of collaborative positive impact programs. So one is a nature-based and reforestation program called Kalika that other companies have been part of as well, and I think has done some great work over the last few years. And then also work as part of supporting women in palm oil through the Her Respect program that BSR have supported and done in various places in the world. So we're active in a couple of spaces, but I think it's challenging for us being so far away from those smallholders, and also, that lack of traceability that we've got. But, other things that we do is for the balance of materials that we don't have covered currently, and it's a very small number by the RSPO mass balance. We cover with RSPO book and claim credits. We've been accessing those for many years, and in the last couple of years we've had the great opportunity to actually access those through things like the Kalika scheme. So we've been supporting that scheme and that project, but also we've been able to buy book and claim credits out of it. So it's kind of double hit for those smallholders. So yes, we do believe in that and do support it, and also appreciate the challenges that those smallholders have got, especially with something like EUDR. That is, let's face it, has a level of administration and paperwork that goes behind it. And yes, for the sort of big companies, they maybe have the bandwidth and the people to be able to do that. But if you're a smallholder, that can be more challenging, and you could be excluding exactly the people that probably need the most support.
The path of least resistance is to cut them out. Let's be brutally honest. In terms of, you have to make an active decision, not an active decision not to, but you have to make the decision not to when the temptation and the incentives from an administrative perspective are to lose them. And that's,
But it's interesting you're talking about credits, though. I mean, we were strangely enough talking about credits before we came on this call. And do you see credits as positive? I mean, we do, but not everyone sees purchase of credits. I mean, credits are within a lot of commodities, but specifically RSPO. Do you see credits as a positive message?
I do, definitely. I think it's that theory of change that RSPO is trying to work through, and I think credits is something, it's showing that there's that, if you have that investment there from people like ourselves, and I know many other companies access them as well. I think that is putting money back into the supply chain and incentivizing smallholders to update their standards and what they're working to. So yeah, we absolutely believe in it. I think it's interesting whether this is still the case, but I believe the WWF Palm scorecard actually puts credits at a higher scoring level than perhaps RSPO mass balance. So it's interesting to see how the different scales, I often thought that credits was your kind of entry, and then you start working up the different standards for RSPO.
That's really interesting. I need to look at that.
Yeah, I think some people
It's the
see it
lowest
as
barrier
slightly
to
different.
entry, isn't it? Really, that's but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the least impactful.
No, exactly. But I think any investment there, I think, is really, really positive. And I think, the credits, if it's doing what it says it is, and I believe it is, I think that is supporting smallholders and getting them on this journey to a way of working that is a more sustainable path for how they're growing and providing those palm oil supplies.
Yeah, and just to say, it's the independent smallholder credits that give greater value in the WWF scorecard. But for sure, I think of what you've described is you must be doing like off-market deals as well to get to your smallholder base. So again, that's a powerful message to encourage them and be able to buy their credits. It's huge, I think, and fantastic story for you to tell within palm oil. I think that's really a really good news story. Yeah, for sure.
Great.
So I think we're nearly coming to a close. I certainly, some of the stories that you're talking about and some of the work that you're doing. I mean, what do you see for the future now within Haleon? What are the next big steps that you want to do as a business?
Well, absolutely. We want to meet this commitment to 2030 that we've set out, and we're well on track to do that. We're coming towards the end of 2025 now, so it feels as though we've got a lot more time, but we've probably hit the hard yards now, as people say, to close out what we need to do, and also get ourselves certainly to deforestation free globally. So that's an absolute commitment that we need to make. Nature, I think, is a topic that we have to touch on, that I think is really nicely bringing all these elements that we might have talked about under one banner, whether it's sustainable sourcing, human rights, water, climate change, all of these other things. We as a company announced last year that we were a TNFD, so that's the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures early adopter, meaning that we will start to put into our reporting our impact on nature, and we've done various assessments there. And again, coming back to the palm topic, the assessments that we've done of nature and resilience and the things that we need to protect and make sustainable to ensure that our products can continue to be made. One of those is our palm oil derivatives. So, we won't be stepping away from it. And I think also some really interesting insights coming out of it that I was aware of, and I'm sure you guys are as well. But I think palm oil has a very bad name for justifiable reasons globally.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we can find a sustainable path for palm oil, the results are back and saying that it's the right way to go. Thoughts of moving to maybe soy or other things. I don't think the firstly global volumes are there to support that. And even if they started to be, the land use of those different vegetable oils versus palm oil is maybe tenfold. So I don't think that's a more sustainable path to go down, but it doesn't get away from the fact that we need to make sure that the palm oil, the standard for supply, becomes a sustainable one that's not deforesting and impacting these other challenges that we see. So we're absolutely committed, and we'll continue the work that we do to 2030 to meet our commitment and make sure that we can still, have access to this wonderful material that supports us to make the great products that we do.
Ben,
Brilliant.
thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for coming on to the Sustainable Commodities podcast. To the audience, thanks for listening, and join us next time.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.